Welcome to Unraveled Crime.
Body camera video shows several officers pull Nichols out of his car and then pepper spray and tase him. After Nichols tried to run away, the officers repeatedly kicked and hit him. Nichols died in the hospital days later. Tonight, prosecutors are reacting to the verdict.
Justice was supposed to be served, but now everything has been thrown into chaos. The case of Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man beaten to death by Memphis police officers, was one of the most shocking tragedies in recent American history. His death was caught on camera. His final cries for his mother echoed across the nation. Millions demanded justice. And for a moment, it seemed justice had come. Officers were convicted. The system appeared to work. But in a stunning twist, a new judge has just torn that verdict apart. A retrial has been ordered, and the men who once stood guilty are now getting another chance at freedom. Before we dive into this disturbing case, if you care about truth, about real accountability, and about the stories others try to bury, make sure you subscribe to Unraveled Crime. We bring you the cases that shake the system, the ones you can't look away from. Hit subscribe now, so you never miss the truth.
News is first at 5 tonight on your news leader. A federal judge has granted a request for a new trial for 3 former Memphis police officers charged in the death of Tyre Nichols, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Stephanie Skurlock. Greg Hurst is off tonight. WREG's chief investigator Jessica Gertler joins us now with more on this breaking story. Jessica, this caught some folks by surprise.
It definitely did, Stephanie. We just got the order. The request for the new trial centers around allegations involving the actions of federal district judge Mark Norris. So the defendants claim Judge Norris was communicating with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI outside the courtroom. So here's what we found out from this order. On October 3rd, 2024, officers were convicted in federal court. So 5 days later, Judge Norris's clerk was reportedly shot in the chest. May 30th, Judge Norris meets with an assistant U.S. attorney and the special agent in charge for the FBI office. He wanted to know why the feds weren't working on this case. He believed the shooting of his clerk involved gangs, and one of the defendants was in a gang. He felt MPD was infiltrated by the gangs. June 13th, he recused himself from the case. Although a new judge found no evidence that Judge Norris did anything wrong on the bench, federal judge Cheryl Littman decided to grant a new trial. And John Keith Perry told us earlier that he's the attorney for Tadarius Bean. He gave us this statement. While Judge Littman is a stickler for rules and procedures, her actions have always upheld the judicial integrity of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Tennessee. And he went on to say, and we will proceed according to the future orders of this court. So we'll have more on this breaking news story tonight on News Channel 3 at 6 and 10. For now, investigating for news leader Jessica Gertler, WREG News Channel 3.
January 7th, 2023. It was supposed to be an ordinary night in Memphis, Tennessee. A night like any other. A night that for most people would have ended quietly. But for Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man, the evening turned into something far darker. A tragedy that would spark protests, lawsuits, and international outrage. Nichols was young, soft-spoken, and creative. He loved skateboarding. He loved photography. Friends described him as gentle, a man who avoided conflict, who preferred peace. That night he was driving home after taking pictures at a park. Just a short drive from where his mother lived, just minutes from safety. Then, everything changed. Police pulled Nichols over. The officers who surrounded his car weren't ordinary patrol cops. They belonged to a special unit called the Scorpion Team. On paper, the Scorpion unit was designed to fight violent crime. Memphis had been struggling with drugs, gangs, and gun violence. Leaders wanted a task force that would strike hard, move fast, and clean up the streets. But critics warned from the very beginning, units like this can be dangerous. They are often given broad power, encouraged to be aggressive and pressured to deliver arrests. Similar crime suppression squads in other cities had histories of abuse. In Memphis, whispers had already begun. People in certain neighborhoods said Scorpion officers were too forceful, too reckless. On this night, their reputation would be sealed forever. Body camera footage shows the stop escalating almost immediately. Officers yanked Nichols from his car. They shouted commands. Confusion filled the air. Nichols sounded scared. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't attacking. But the officers pressed harder. They used pepper spray. They fired a taser. The chaos was overwhelming. Nichols broke free and ran, not toward a stranger's home, not toward some random hiding place. He ran toward his mother's house, the place he thought he would be safe. He made it only a few hundred feet before the officers caught him again. And that's when the beating began. The attack was brutal. Nichols was punched. He was kicked. He was struck with a police baton. He was held down and hit again. One of the most chilling parts. The entire incident was captured by a pole camera mounted nearby, a high unblinking eye that recorded every blow. What the camera revealed shocked the world. Officers weren't panicked. They weren't scrambling to subdue a violent suspect. They were in control, and yet they chose violence. They hit Nichols repeatedly while he barely moved. They laughed. They bragged. They even exchanged fist bumps, as if celebrating what they had done. Meanwhile, Tyre Nichols collapsed. His body gave out. He cried out for his mother, his voice weak, his words desperate. Just a few hundred feet from where she slept, he begged for her help. An ambulance was called, but slowly. Paramedics did not rush. Officers failed to give aid. Minutes stretched into eternity. Nichols lay on the ground, his body broken. 3 days later, on January 10, 2023, he died in the hospital. When the footage became public, it spread like wildfire. News networks played it. Social media amplified it. People everywhere saw the same images, a young black man beaten by a group of officers sworn to protect him. The reaction was immediate. Cities across America erupted in protest. Signs demanding justice, crowds marching in the streets. Another name added to the long list of black men killed or brutalized by police. For Memphis, it was devastating. For the Nichols family, it was unbearable. Under intense pressure, Memphis police announced they were disbanding the Scorpion unit. Just months earlier, it had been praised as a major step toward safer streets. Now it was a stain on the city. The truth was clear. Instead of protecting the community, the Scorpion officers had become a threat to it, and their reckless violence had destroyed a family. Within weeks, 5 officers were charged in connection with Nichols's death. Their names, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Justin Smith, Emmett Martin, and Desmond Mills Jr. All 5 were fired. All 5 faced state and federal charges. It was rare, very rare. Usually, cases of police violence end with long investigations and little accountability. But this time was different. The video evidence was undeniable. The Department of Justice stepped in. Civil rights charges were added. America watched closely. Over time, the 5 officers took different paths. 2 of them, Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills Jr., chose to plead guilty. They admitted what they had done. They accepted responsibility, at least in part. Their decision stunned some observers. Plea deals in cases like this are not common. But Martin and Mills knew the evidence against them was overwhelming. By cooperating, they hoped for lighter sentences. The other 3, Bean, Haley, and Smith, refused to admit guilt. They chose to fight the charges in court. Their lawyers argued that the situation was chaotic, that their actions were not criminal, and that the lines between use of force and abuse were blurred. But the jury didn't buy it. By October 2024, the verdicts were in. Bean, Haley, and Smith were found guilty of obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Investigators proved that they had filed false reports. They had lied to supervisors. They had tried to twist the story of what happened that night. They weren't just violent. They were dishonest. They attempted to cover it all up. But for Demetrius Haley, the consequences went further. He faced additional charges for violating Nichols's civil rights. The jury agreed. They found him guilty of causing bodily harm, ignoring Nichols's urgent medical needs, and conspiring to hide the truth. Haley became the central figure in the case, a symbol of everything that went wrong that night. For Nichols's family, The verdicts offered some relief. They had sat through testimony. They had listened to legal arguments. They had relived their son's death again and again in the courtroom. And at least finally, there was accountability. Not full justice, because Tyre Nichols was still gone. No sentence could bring him back. But it was a step. A recognition by the system that what happened was wrong. Civil rights leaders also called the convictions important. For decades, families of victims had fought to hold police accountable. Rarely did officers face federal charges, much less convictions. This case marked progress. Just when the Nichols family thought they could begin to heal, cracks began to appear. The case was not as straightforward as it seemed. Lawyers for the convicted officers filed appeals. Questions were raised about how the Scorpion unit was supervised, how the Memphis Police Department trained its officers, and whether city officials had ignored warnings long before Nichols' death. Some began to argue that the case wasn't just about 5 officers, it was about an entire system. A system that rewarded aggression, a system that blurred the line between policing and brutality, and soon new evidence would surface. Evidence that threatened to unravel everything the Nichols family had fought for. When a jury returns a guilty verdict, most people think the story is over. The case is closed. The punishment is next. But in this case, it wasn't over. In fact, the real twist hadn't even begun, because just before sentencing, the judge, the man who presided over the entire trial, suddenly stepped aside. And the reason why shook the justice system to its core. His name was Mark S. Norris, a federal judge with years of experience on the bench. Judges are supposed to be neutral, impartial, the guardians of fairness. But according to a notice filed by the U.S. Attorney's Office, Norris had been harboring troubling private beliefs. Beliefs that went far beyond legal rulings, beliefs that cracked the foundation of trust in his courtroom. Norris had developed a theory that at least one of the officers on trial was connected to a gang. Not just a passing thought, he said it. And not just once, he repeated it, over and over. To him it wasn't speculation, it was conviction. But there was no evidence. No link between the officers and any gang activity had ever been established in court. Still, Norris couldn't let it go, and that's where everything began to unravel. Then came the incident that pushed things even further. Just days after the trial ended, tragedy struck close to the judge himself. His law clerk, an innocent young man, was shot during what investigators said was a car theft. Police concluded it was the work of juveniles, a crime of opportunity. Random violence in a city already struggling with rising crime. But Judge Norris didn't believe it. He suspected something darker, something personal. In his mind, the shooting wasn't random at all. It was connected to the very case he had just overseen. And once again, he tied it back to the officers on trial. He even suggested, without proof, that the police department itself might be infiltrated with gang members. For defense lawyers, this was dynamite. Here was a federal judge openly connecting their clients to gangs, even linking them in his mind to violence against his own staff. To the defense, it was clear. This wasn't neutrality. This wasn't impartial justice. This was bias, and not just ordinary bias. This was the kind of bias that struck at the heart of a fair trial. They filed their motion. They argued that Norris's private beliefs had tainted the proceedings, that even if he had ruled correctly in court, his mindset revealed a dangerous prejudice. And that prejudice, they argued, violated their client's constitutional rights.
Well, today, a Tennessee jury found 3 former Memphis police officers charged in the death of Tyre Nichols not guilty. Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith faced several state charges, including second-degree murder. The officers were accused of killing 29-year-old Tyre Nichols during a traffic stop in 2023. Body camera video shows several officers pull Nichols out of his car and then pepper spray and tase him. After Nichols tried to run away, the officers repeatedly kicked and hit him. Nichols died in the hospital days later. Tonight, prosecutors are reacting to the verdict.
Tyre Nichols is dead and deserves to be alive. Our office will continue to push for accountability for everybody who violates the law, including, if not especially, those who are sworn to uphold it.
Now, all three men could still face prison time because they were convicted on federal charges in this case. Two other former officers are also serving time in this case after pleading guilty to both state and federal charges.
At first glance, it might seem like an overreach. After all, Judge Norris's rulings in the trial had been described as legally sound. He had handled objections, motions, and instructions according to the law. But in America's justice system, the appearance of fairness is just as important as fairness itself. Because if people cannot trust that judges are impartial, then every verdict becomes suspect. And that's exactly the argument that won. The case went before Judge Cheryl H. Lippman. Her job was to decide whether Norris's private beliefs, his repeated gang theories, his suspicions about his clerk's shooting, his fears about police infiltration, were enough to undermine the trial. She faced a difficult question. If a judge makes fair rulings but holds biased private beliefs, is the trial still valid? Her ruling was historic. Judge Lippman admitted that Norris's decisions in the courtroom were indeed fair, legally sound, grounded in law, but that wasn't the point. Because justice is not only about rulings, it's about trust. If a reasonable person could believe the judge was biased, then justice was already compromised, even if no biased rulings were made. In her words, even the appearance of bias was enough to shatter confidence in the trial. And with that, the entire case collapsed. The convictions were thrown out, the guilty verdicts were erased, a brand new trial was ordered. The officers who had once faced sentencing now had another chance, all because of the private thoughts of one judge. This twist wasn't just shocking, it raised haunting questions about the justice system itself. How many other judges carry private biases that never come to light? How many rulings, verdicts, or sentences have been influenced by hidden suspicions or personal fears? And most importantly, can a system built on human judgment ever truly be free of human bias? For the families of the victims, the ruling was devastating. They had watched the trial unfold. They had endured the pain of testimony, evidence, and verdicts. Now it was all wiped away. For the officers, it was a lifeline, an unexpected second chance to fight for freedom. And for the city, it was chaos, because instead of closure, Memphis was left with uncertainty. Instead of justice, it was left with questions. The story is still unfolding, but one fact is undeniable. This case proved that justice is fragile. One judge's private theories, spoken out loud, repeated, believed, were enough to undo months of work, enough to erase the certainty of a trial, enough to remind the nation that justice doesn't just happen in the courtroom, it happens in the minds of those who sit in judgment. And when those minds show bias, justice itself is on trial. The ruling sent shockwaves through Memphis. What was supposed to be the closing chapter in a long, painful trial had been ripped wide open. For the families of the officers, it was a moment of relief. For the Nichols family, it was a wound torn open all over again. Justice, something they had been told was finally in reach, was suddenly slipping back into uncertainty. The decision to overturn the convictions wasn't just a legal technicality, it was a seismic event. To many, it felt like the justice system itself had flinched at the final moment. For Tyre Nichols' loved ones, the courtroom had always been a place of unbearable pain. They had sat through months of testimony. They had listened to experts describe the force used against Tyre. They had watched officers, men entrusted to protect the city, stand accused of brutality. And when the guilty verdicts were read, the Nichols family had believed it was the beginning of healing. But Judge Cheryl Lippman's order changed everything. By ruling that Judge Mark S. Norris's apparent bias had tainted the process, the convictions were vacated. In practical terms, it meant starting over. For the Nichols family, it meant bracing themselves for another trial, another cycle of testimonies, cross-examinations, and sleepless nights. Every glance at a courtroom bench would remind them, closure is still out of reach. The reactions from the defense teams were telling. Blake Smith's attorney quickly seized the opportunity, calling the ruling proof that the system, despite its flaws, could still correct itself. He described Judge Lippman's decision as an act of courage, suggesting that she had done what was necessary to preserve the integrity of the courts. But not everyone wanted to speak. Desmond Mills and Tadarius Bean's legal teams stayed silent, their lack of comment speaking volumes. Silence in law is often a strategy, but here it seemed heavy, almost calculated. The Memphis Police Department too chose not to issue a statement. Their silence was no less conspicuous. This was a department already under fire, its officers accused of killing an unarmed man, its reputation stained across headlines nationwide. To say anything at this point would risk reopening wounds or hinting at internal fractures. And so the department remained silent, at least in public. Behind the scenes, however, the prosecutors were scrambling. The federal government had invested enormous time and resources into securing convictions. Now, they had to weigh their next steps carefully. Should they retry every charge? Should they streamline the case? Should they push harder, or step back, fearing another collapse in court? There was no easy answer. Prosecutors know that retrials are uphill battles. Witnesses can become less cooperative. Memories fade. Evidence that once felt sharp loses its edge when jurors are told they're watching the same trial again. And yet, the Nichols case was far too high profile to simply abandon. The eyes of the nation were still on Memphis. The prosecutors were left in an unenviable position. Decide which parts of the case to carry forward and which battles to let go. Every choice they made would be scrutinized, not only by the families but by the entire country. For the officers, the ruling was nothing short of a lifeline. They had been staring down the barrel of prison sentences. Now those sentences had vanished into thin air. Freedom, at least temporary freedom, was restored. But that freedom came with a shadow. A retrial meant risk. It meant that the fight wasn't over, only delayed. And it meant that the officers' names would once again dominate the headlines, once again be dissected on nightly news, once again be the subject of endless social media outrage. For them, the ruling was a paradox, a gift of time, but also a curse of prolonged uncertainty. In Memphis, the community felt the ruling like an earthquake. Activists who had marched for Tyre Nichols saw it as a betrayal. Neighborhoods still scarred from protests and clashes with police braced themselves for another round. The idea of justice delayed struck a nerve. Some residents feared that justice was being denied altogether. The ruling also placed the Memphis Police Department back under the microscope. Judge Norris's claims that the department was infiltrated with gang members had already damaged trust. Now, with the convictions gone, many in the city wondered if those claims had played a deeper role than anyone wanted to admit. Was the department truly compromised? Or had the judge's private beliefs derailed a hard-won case? The questions hung heavy over Memphis, poisoning faith in both the police and the courts. The case didn't just stay local, it had national implications. The killing of Tyre Nichols had already sparked comparisons to other infamous cases of police brutality: George Floyd, Eric Garner, Breonna Taylor. It had ignited debates about police reform, accountability, and systemic bias. Now the retrial meant those debates would only intensify. Civil rights groups across the country condemned the ruling, warning that it sent the wrong message to victims of police violence, that convictions, even when secured, might not hold. On the other hand, legal scholars pointed out that Judge Lippman's ruling was legally sound. Fairness, they argued, isn't about convenience. If a judge harbors beliefs that create even the appearance of bias, justice demands correction, even if it means reliving a trial. It was a bitter irony. A ruling intended to protect fairness had left many feeling that fairness was slipping further away. And in the middle of it all, the Nichols family waited. They had already endured the unbearable, the death of Tyre, the video of his final moments, the trial that dragged every detail into public view. Now they faced the prospect of doing it all again, to sit in a courtroom, to hear their son's name invoked again and again, to see the men accused of killing him walk in with fresh hope. Every delay felt like another act of cruelty. Every legal maneuver felt like a reminder that justice moves at a pace that victims cannot control. For the Nichols family, it was more than a retrial. It was a sentence of grief with no end date. At this moment, no retrial date has been set. The prosecutors are reviewing their options. The defense teams are strategizing behind closed doors. The police department is holding its silence. But one thing is certain. The story of Tyre Nichols is not over. It will continue in another courtroom under new conditions, with new questions and perhaps new outcomes. For the officers, it is a second chance at freedom. For the prosecutors, it is a second chance at proving their case. For the city of Memphis, it is a second test of trust. And for the Nichols family, it is a second nightmare they never asked to endure. Justice hangs in the balance. The retrial will decide what comes next. But for now, Memphis waits, the family waits, and the nation once again holds its breath. This isn't just about one case. It's about a system that convicts men one year, then erases those convictions the next. It's about whether America can truly hold its police accountable, and it's about a mother still grieving, still crying out for justice for her son. Thank you for watching. The fight for justice in Tyre Nichols' case is far from over. With the convictions thrown out and a retrial ahead, every update matters. If you want to stay informed on this case and other true crime investigations, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next. Share your thoughts in the comments, because together we can follow the truth, hold power accountable, and make sure justice is never forgotten.